Hi, my name is Simon Batchelor, and I had hoped to be with you, but unfortunately, a cold or a flu has prevented that. I am Research Coordinator for Modern Energy Cooking Services, a UK aid-funded program, and for the last 5 years, we've been looking at the possibilities of deploying e-cooking in various countries across the globe. The reason we ended up looking at e-cooking is because we did a political economy analysis and found that the clean cooking sector was treated as an isolated energy sector. There's lots of considerable progress on SDG 7, 7.1.1 on access to modern energy, but generally that means electricity. And people talked about it in terms of good for light, charging phones, radio, television, and productive uses, but rarely did they talk about it as a possibility for cooking. Meanwhile, over here, there were a group of professionals who were looking at clean cooking, the whole biomass, the 3 billion people that are still using biomass for their cooking, poisoning themselves, 4 million premature deaths every year across the globe. And the two were not being treated as a single problem. And what we have seen over the last few years is those two things coming together. And so SEforALL now has an integrated energy planning tool. We see utilities in East Africa and India beginning to talk about e-cooking, and there are lots of possibilities of leveraging and building on the progress that we've seen on the modern energy cooking side to be inclusive of clean energy. So deployment in Asia and the Pacific needs to build on what is happening elsewhere. It doesn't need to deploy e-cooking as a separate thing, but as part of an integrated thing. On this slide here, I outline some of the activities of the Ayrton Fund, which is a £1 billion commitment from the British government to clean energy. And that includes things like next generation solar and efficient appliances. I'll talk about the efficient appliances in a moment. Energy storage. There are new opportunities opening up because of the way the battery storage is changing. That mitigates some of the difficulties in grid deployment, and of course opens up a lot of the off-grid work as well. So there is a possibility of leveraging all the work in the modern energy cooking sector to be inclusive of the very poor who are still using biomass and pivot them to the deployment of e-cooking. That includes pulling together policy environments of decarbonisation, nationally determined contributions, and using those as leverage for clean cooking. Engaging with the private sector. Clean cooking has been characterized by a lot of small startups that just try to do improved cook stoves. This is an opportunity to engage large players, multinationals that are have deployed e-cooking appliances in developed economies and can now bring that learning to bear on low and middle income countries. And that opens up lots of opportunity for finance, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So I don't want to get too technical with you, but in this slide I've tried to capture some of the energy efficiency elements that we are beginning to talk about. When you have gas or biomass, the air goes up the side of the pot, and even if you've got a lid on the pot, there's inefficiencies, and we all know some of the inefficiencies within biomass and gas cooking. When we come to e-cooking, the most obvious and the one that has traditionally sort of found its way into the market is the resistive coil, which just creates a hot element that tries to put heat into the pot. I say tries because, as you can see from the diagram, you still can have losses up the outside because the coil is not fitting the pot properly. That heat transfer between coil and pot is not that great. That's why so many people talk about induction. Induction stoves actually use magnetic flux to generate the heat within the pot, and therefore you can't get losses up the side. It only operates where it operates, and that transfer of heat is more efficient. But once the heat is in the pot, and particularly if you're doing a long cook, boiling of beans or something like that, the pot itself is radiating heat outwards, up to about 300-400 watts on a large pot used in Africa. And so actually to have some insulation reduces energy loss and increases the efficiency of the whole device. So in our work, particularly in Africa, we have encouraged the use of electric pressure cookers. Now, in Asia, of course, rice cookers are beginning to be ubiquitous. People know that there's a good energy efficiency from rice cookers. But to take that one step forward and actually do main stews, dals, other types, if the food culture is stir fry and what we would call short cooking, then those efficiency gains are not that great, and induction is the way to go. If, on the other hand, you have long cooking in any shape or form, electric pressure cookers are the way to go. Electric pressure cookers can fry, but they can't take the high heat of creating something like roti. Having just mentioned roti, it's very important in deploying eCooking that you fit the culture and the taste of the people. You don't want to mess with people's cooking. And so we spend a lot of time. You'll see here examples of e-cookbooks where we have taken controlled cooking tests, and we've taken kitchen performance tests, and we take a cooking diary approach to ensure that whatever we're doing with the various new energy efficient devices can cook culturally acceptable food to the right taste. You'll see in the middle graph, we of course we measure the energy, and of course we measure the cost. And the middle graph really illustrates how much cheaper the EPC, the electric pressure cooker, is compared to induction on long cooking meals. So any meal that takes more than 15 minutes, the electric pressure cooker possibly will save quite a lot of money, particularly over a long period of time. You'll also see on the left that there's some comparisons with LPG, and it's very cost effective compared to LPG, even when the LPG is subsidized, as in the Indian case. So do please go to our website and find these various cookbooks relevant to your country. And if you don't find your country there, then do contact us, because we'd love to do the same. Now, I talked earlier about finance. The deployment of eCooking creates a wonderful opportunity. Some of you will know that in the recent 12 months, there's been quite a bit of pushback on carbon finance. There has been a study come out of the University of California that showed that improved cook stove programs were overclaiming carbon by almost a factor of 6. And then there is pushback on various other carbon programs where trees have not been planted, or they were going to be planted anyway. The whole thing about carbon finance is its additionality. It should be something that actually swaps out carbon that wouldn't have happened normally. We, as a research group, worked with Gold Standard to create a new methodology for measuring and verification of carbon consumption. So whereas improved cook stoves were often dispersed to the user, and then there was no real way of knowing whether that cook stove went into the cupboard and wasn't used, or was, there were random checks to try and see what the usage was like. With the metered methodology, we can use, with electricity, you can measure how much electricity people are using. And so with the Internet of Things, you can have appliances that are deployed that are giving you real-time data on people's use of the device. And the example on the slide is a group called ATEC, who have done this with induction stoves in Bangladesh, and several thousands. I'm not sure how many there are at the moment. And what this means in reality is that whereas all this challenge to the carbon finance has reduced the price of carbon. So we have partners who were getting $9 per ton of carbon saved, and are now being offered $3 or $4 per ton because there's all this literature about overclaiming and everything. With the metered methodology, our partners are being offered premium rates, and particularly because of Article 6, the bilateral between government to government and the new rules that are coming in with carbon, the metered methodology gives you a verification and an accuracy, and therefore people are willing to pay. We have offers of $25 and $30 per ton. That really changes things because now it's not only covering the upfront cost of the appliance, but there's this possibility of passing carbon finance all the way down to the user. So ATEC in Bangladesh have worked with Fair Climate Fund, and actually 70% of the carbon finance will flow all the way down to the user. Now that means about $200 over a 5-year period. It may not sound very much, but to many of these poor households, that makes a huge difference. So they are saving, by switching on to this induction, they are saving compared to their previous expenditure on LPG and charcoal. And then they are actually getting some sort of cash back. We're not quite sure what to call it at the moment, but there's a cash back flow to them through their mobile wallet over the next few years. So I think this carbon finance is a fantastic new opportunity. It connects well with the whole net zero pathway and decarbonisation that we're trying to go for. It still adds considerably to SDG 7, particularly 7.1.2, but by integrating it with 7.1.1, and indeed by drawing on renewable energy, 7.2, and energy efficiency, 7.3. So by integrating it all together, we get a leveraging effect that should be able to tackle this clean cooking problem that is basically behind where it should be if we're not going to reach 2030 on current trajectories. So we need something that just takes the step further, and that either involves a lot of expenditure or it involves leveraging our existing expenditure. So I'm ending on this last slide, just saying what the cost of inaction is. This was created by ESMAP, and I'm sure many of you realize that clean cooking is so important, and deploying eCooking is a way to actually make strong gains in this arena.